Alrighty. Hello, and welcome to this video. This is going to be my overview and discussion of the Xenosaga trilogy as a whole. I'm going to only briefly kind of cover episode 1 and 2 here, because I kind of want to talk more about episode 3 and some other things around the Xenosaga series as a whole here. So, I'm just going to kind of get to it here. First thing I kind of want to say, just kind of a general overview of the Xenosaga series as I kind of see it here. And I'm going to start off with a thought here. I want you to picture this in your mind here. I'm trying to describe it to you. There was an idea for an epic 6-part science fiction JRPG video game. And that is what the Xeno series was going to be. This idea is not new to Xenosaga. It started with Xenogears. Xenogears was originally supposed to be an epic 6-part JRPG storyline. But it failed. We only got episode 5. And then it ended on a very cryptic note. And the rest of the parts of the story were kind of hinted at throughout the game, and it wasn't until we had the Perfect Works book that we actually got a little bit more detail as to what those other supposed parts of Xenogears were going to cover, with the most notable exceptions that we have the least amount of information about episodes 1 and what episode 6 would have been. But other than that, you can kind of piece together what the rest of the parts of the story were supposed to be. But as I mentioned, it failed. Xenogears was made by Squaresoft at the time, and Squaresoft did not see fit to continue with Tetsuya Takahashi's vision of this epic game series, which in reality, he kind of wanted it to rival the Final Fantasy series at the time, and that was kind of the idea also behind it. But I guess Square wasn't really keen on that, and considering that, yeah, Xenogears just took too much work and effort to make, so we're just not going to do that. So Takahashi left Squaresoft, and along with his wife, Soraya Saga, and he got some of the other people who worked on the previous game to come together to kind of form a new game company on his own, Monolith Soft. So they got a new financial sponsor, and in this case it was Namco at the time. And he decided, you know what, I really want to try to make this story a thing. So I'm going to try again here. And this is where Xenosaga came about. So again, Xenosaga would be an epic 6-part video game JRPG full of science fiction with philosophy and psychology and mature themes and transhumanism and just a whole mix of things, along with various intermixes of general other fandoms, like a little bit from Star Trek or a little bit from Star Wars here and there, and just make something really epic. And that was sort of the idea behind Xenosaga. So the original idea here was going to be similar to what Xenogears was, but not quite exactly the same. There's actually a whole lot of background material, interviews, books and everything. There's just a ton of material out there to kind of go through, and I have like a whole zip file collection of a whole bunch of information here, and there's a lot of stuff here, and it takes a really long time to go through, and I've been trying to kind of pour through it for the past week. And there's just so much to cover that I just can't really get into everything in there. So I'm only going to cover like a few interesting little tidbits that I kind of came across throughout this material that I've been kind of going through. There's this, but there's also another. But if you want like an easier way to digest a lot of this information, there is a website out there called the Xenosaga Xenogears Study Guide. I'll provide a link to it in my description below. You can just look at that, and that actually does a really good summary of all this heaps and heaps of information, and this kind of puts it all together in a probably a more easily digestible format. But to kind of get on to what I'm talking about here in general here about Xenosaga, they didn't really want to remake Xenogears like piece by piece. They wanted to basically remake the idea behind what Xenogears was. So there's a difference to me between the idea of the story and the story as it's already been written. So the story as it's already been written in Xenogears, they can't really do that again because that belongs to Squaresoft now. The characters, the mechs, the world, and some of the specific terminology and everything, I guess, is all part of Xenogears, and that belongs to Squaresoft, and so they can't really exactly use all of that again, but they can remake the idea, and that's what Xenosaga pretty much was. It was to remake the idea behind Xenogears. So, and basically what I wanted to do was just start from the beginning. Do it right. Instead of doing episode 5, we're going to start at the beginning of episode 1 here. Now, the other big kind of the difference here, though, is that we're not going to spend so much time on one planet like what happened in Xenogears, because Xenogears, the majority of Xenogears' overall storyline is just on that one planet here. Xenosaga is to span a galaxy, almost, kind of. But there are several different worlds involved in Xenosaga, and they also kind of wanted to restructure the storyline too. And part of the original idea is that, yes, there would be 6 episodes to Xenosaga, but it would also kind of be split into 3 different distinct story arcs within Xenosaga. So the original idea was that episodes 1 and 2 would cover one story arc, episodes 3 and 4 would cover the second arc, and 5 and 6 would cover the final arc, the final story arc of the Xenosaga of in its entirety. Now, what ended up happening with the actual Xenosaga trilogy was far different from what was planned. So, as you know, we got the trilogy, the episodes 1, 2, and 3. Now, in the general material and everything I've been going through, and it's made pretty clear here that episodes 1 and 2 of what we got was originally intended to be the planned out episode 1. So everything that kind of happened in episodes 1 and 2 of the games was originally supposed to be just episode 1, that one part of the Xenosaga. So you're going to see kind of the problem that's kind of starting to develop here is that the story is getting a little too expansive. It's getting too big for its own, to even stay within its own container of one game, of one episode. So they already had, so it's kind of like right off the start, Xenosaga did not necessarily get off to the best start here. So because they couldn't really contain all the information in episode 1 within episode 1, it had to spill over into episode 2. And even like replaying episodes 1 and 2, I definitely see where episode 1 just kind of stops and then immediately jumps into episode 2. And I've always felt like the first disc of episode 2 was supposed to was basically the second half of what episode 1 was supposed to be, because I kind of feel like maybe it was supposed to end when the Y data was finally unlocked and unleashed into the wild, and old Milsha's location was finally revealed. I feel like that would have been a more appropriate spot for episode 1 to actually end on, because now you kind of have this big finale and you have a setup now for where the next game is going to be, the actual episode 2. So, but apparently, from what I've read, apparently everything in episode 2 was supposed to be part of episode 1, so that includes all the stuff in disc 2 as well. So I'm assuming now that the original end of episode 1 was supposed to end with the recovery of the actual Zohar, which happens at the end of episode 2, and the revelation of Abel's Ark, and the Omega system going out of control and everything, and the Testaments kind of revealing themselves. So I'm guessing that was supposed to be what episode 1 was supposed to be originally. So, and pretty much after that point, the Xenosaga storyline went through. It basically floundered a bit in terms of, it kind of went way off course, I guess, from what its original story was supposed to be. So at that point, episode 2 didn't do too well, and Namco was like, we have to bring the axe down and just end this series now because it's not going to work out the way we thought it would. So Monolith Soft had to prematurely bring Xenosaga to an end, and that's what we got, episode 3. Now I'm gonna be left forever wondering just how exactly how close to the original story plan episode 3 was, and to be honest, I'm not really sure how close it is. I think it, from what I understand, it takes a lot of the story ideas that were outlined probably for what the original episode 2 was going to be, and just kind of smushed them all together. And it kind of feels that way because the first half of episode 3, it feels like it would have been like what the original plan for what episode 2 probably would have been like. Like it would have been up to that point where I guess we would have all the stuff about old Miltia finally figured out, and then we probably would jump into the war between the Galaxy Federation and the Immigrant Fleet, and probably would have ended with dealing with Dmitry Yuriev on the Merkaba, and the Zohar and the Gnosis getting unleashed and everything. That probably would have ended there. At least that's the way I kind of imagine things would have gone. And that would have been where the actual episode 2 would have ended. And at that point, you would have that would be the end of the first story arc. And then you would jump into the second story arc, which, from what I understand, was supposed to take place on Lost Jerusalem. A lot of the original cast at that point would kind of just go away from the plot at that point. I'm pretty sure Shion would probably... I don't know if Shion would have still been around, but at least I think they imply that there would be like future incarnations of the other characters. There's this idea of reincarnation, very similar to what was happening in Xenogears with Abel and Ellie in Xenogears. They do kind of subtly imply that at the end of the actual episode 3 game, that all the souls are going to go back to Lost Jerusalem, and apparently Jin is supposed to reincarnate as well on Lost Jerusalem. So yes, he died, but he's supposed to reincarnate as well. And apparently that this idea of reincarnation was implied to be an actual thing because Shion is a reincarnation of the Maiden of Mary, and Mary Magdalene reincarnates inside KOS-MOS and Talos as well. So there is an element of reincarnation within the games. It's just it doesn't really become a thing until like the very end. You're really not aware of this until the very end, and even then it's just kind of hand waved away to just kind of wrap the series up, basically. But anyway, as I was getting back to that second arc of what Xenosaga was supposed to be, it was supposed to take place on Lost Jerusalem, and supposedly at that point we would start seeing more of the Xenosaga, not Xenosaga, the Xenogears stuff would kind of come back into play again. So, and at that point, we probably would have had something like a subtle remake of Xenogears at that point. And then once that's done between episodes 3 and 4, then we would jump into the final arc, which would be 5 and 6, of which at this point I think it's anybody's guess what it would have been, but I like to think that some of the very, very last stuff that happens in episode 3 involving the Zarathustra system and Wilhelm's ultimate revelation about everything, I kind of feel like that's what would have originally happened maybe in episode 6. So that's just my speculation. So, but anyway, but basically the whole point is that the Xenosaga failed as a story, and sometimes it is kind of, I do like to think about what would have been had the Xenosaga storyline actually succeeded and been told the way it was meant to be told in its original 6-part epic. So, and keep in mind, this is the second attempt to tell this story. The first attempt was Xenogears. This is the second attempt, and now both of these attempts to tell this story have failed, pretty much. So, but yeah. So anyway, let me move on to talking about the actual episodes themselves here. Like I said, I'm only going to cover episode 1 and 2 kind of briefly here because I want to spend more time talking about episode 3 here. Just to kind of give my general overview of episode 1. I think episode 1 is still a pretty good looking game. I think it's a decent game, but I think definitely on replaying it so long later, that's probably not the best way to word that, but you know, after all this time, since the first time I played the game, I can't help but feeling like my overall sense of episode 1 was that, and I've heard other people describe it this way, that episode 1 feels more like a prologue or a prelude to what the overall saga was supposed to be, and I admit I kind of got that vibe from episode 1. Now to get into like a few little specific things about episode 1 here, just I don't want to get into too much depth here, but the combat system, a lot of people say it's supposed to be like a improved version of the combat from Xenogears. I never really saw that or felt that too much. I felt like they dumbed down a lot of things from the Xenogears combat system, and the result is that I felt like the combat was dull and boring for the most part to me. So sometimes when I kind of look back at a video game, I have this kind of general impression of it, like what was the general mood, what was the general vibe I got from a video game when I played it. And when I think back to when I replayed episode 1, like last year, my general vibe is that I was just bored. I was just bored by so much that was going on. I mean, I liked the storyline and the characters, but most of that was told through cutscenes and everything. When it came to the actual gameplay parts, I was just bored. And there may be a couple of reasons for that. Again, I didn't really find the combat system that amazing in episode 1. I thought it was very dull. The other thing probably was just the music. They had a weird idea to use a lot of ambience and silence in a lot of areas in episode 1, and use a lot of the music for the actual cutscenes and everything, which, I mean, for what music is there by Yasunori Matsuda, it's actually pretty good. I don't think it's his best work though, but I think it's adequate for what's there in the game. But replaying it, I do think they made a mistake by not having more music in the game. I think it just created this. I think it just added to the sense of boredom I had when I was playing. It's like these areas are just too quiet. Like, there should be something going on here, just to kind of liven the mood up a little bit here in certain areas and within the dungeons and everything. And of course, we need to have more than one battle music. And it's weird because I have the Xenosaga 1 OST and I do listen to it every now and then, and there's probably at least two or three other tracks on the soundtrack that probably could work as boss battle music. So I don't know why they just didn't like remix those and use those as a boss battle music. Could have worked. It would not have taken that much effort in my opinion to do. But yeah, for whatever reasons they went with the reasons they did, and that's what we have right now. The other thing is the eggs in episode 1. I know there's a lot of people who don't really care for the eggs, and I can totally understand that. The thing about the eggs is that they just weren't utilized properly in episode 1. If there was like a reason to use the eggs in episode 1, I think they could have been more useful. But as it is, they're just kind of like an option. They're just an option for fights, so you don't have to use an eggs at all. So it's kind of like, well, why even bother having them in the game in the first place? I guess they're just there because they need some kind of mecha in the game. But yeah, the last thing I'll probably mention about episode 1, and this is a thought. This is a thought that occurred to me when I've been reading through all this kind of background material and everything. Episode 1 is probably the closest game out of the trilogy to what the original vision of the Xenosaga was supposed to be. And what I mean by that is, Episode 1 probably had the least amount of changes made to it compared to what the original plan was. So, for better or worse, that is probably an interesting way to look at it. And it kind of, I guess it means Episode 1 is probably the most pure in the sense when it comes to the overall Xenosaga saga. So, I guess think of that what you will. Alright, let me talk about Episode 2 here. Episode 2, I know, is pretty divisive among the Xeno fans and Xenosaga fans in particular. When I played through Episode 2, a really funny thing happens. I know the game's got a lot of quality issues, there's a lot of things about it I don't particularly like. But I notice I mentioned this before, I kind of like playing Episode 2 a little bit better than Episode 1. But like I mentioned with Episode 1, I just felt this general sense of boredom for most of Episode 1. Episode 2, I don't really remember feeling bored. I just remember, like, okay, we're making progress with the story, and we're making some interesting developments with the characters and all. Which, by the way, going back to Episode 1, there really wasn't much development for any of the characters in Episode 1. It was more like just introductions. Again, going back to that whole sense of being as a prologue rather than actually starting the saga. Episode 2 feels more like the actual start of the saga in some ways. Because we actually have actual development of the characters happening now. Especially when it comes to Junior, and Momo and Albedo, and the background of the URTVs. And everything. We really don't get too much from the other characters, like Shion, or we get a little bit from Jin. Not much from Ziggy or KOS, who will remain a mystery. KOS's development doesn't really happen until like the very end of like Episode 3. It's so crazy. But anyway, back to Episode 2 here. The big thing about Episode 2, that a lot of people that generally stands out to people about Episode 2, is the stylistic and voiceover changes. I admit I'm not really a big fan of the way they redesigned the characters in Episode 2. I think they just look bad in general. And the change in voices, which I don't know why they did that. I don't know why they had to change the voice actors, but again, this comes back to a problem where I really can't specifically blame the voice actors for this. Again, this is a voice direction problem. They didn't really act the characters out in a way that was emotive. A lot of the characters sound very flat, especially with KOS and Jin. And there's a few other examples of this throughout the game as well. It's just, and I even joked about this when I was replaying Episode 2. It was like, KOS, what is happening over here? Oh wait, something bad is happening. I should get emotional here at this moment. A lot of voice acting between KOS and Jin just sounds like that, and it's just, and even with Kanan as well, who's introduced in this game. I'm just like, for God's sake, just emote, try emoting. But again, it's up to the voice director to do that for the voice actors. Like, you need to emote in this part of the scene. Why are you not emoting? They're just reading the lines off the script, and it's just so, it's so bothersome. Combat system in Episode 2. I wasn't really a fan of the combat system in Episode 2. I can recognize that it is more involved than Episode 1. But the problem is that it just feels unbalanced to me. Like, it's so skewed in favor of the break and the boost combo system that it dominates and takes over every aspect of the battle system. Because you'll eventually get to a point in Episode 2 where you just have to do breaks and boost combos all the time. Because if you don't do that, you're not doing any significant damage to the enemy. Even the regular enemies, you're not doing any damage to them. And it just becomes, especially when you get close towards the end of the game, it gets really aggravating, because in every random encounter or fight you run into, some of which you can't really avoid because they place the enemy in a narrow path and you can't get around them. You have to fight them, and then those battles just drag out. They drag out because you have to stock up for boost. So you can do set up the combos, then you have to find the enemy's weaknesses and make sure you hit them in the right order to break them. Then you need to topple them or launch them, and then do your boost combos. In the middle of which they can also interrupt your combos with a counter boost as well, which is just adds to the aggravation too, and then you have to start all over again. But yeah, I remember hearing some rumors. I read some rumors somewhere, and I haven't been able to find this in the material I've been kind of going through, but I remember reading somewhere a rumor that Episode 2 was originally balanced and designed around having actual equipment on the characters, and that there originally was supposed to be an inventory system and a shop system in the game, but they just kind of took it out because they didn't have the time to implement it properly. And, replaying for Episode 2 and thinking about this actually makes a lot of sense to me now. Because if there was actual equipment, like better weapons you could equip on the characters, they would be able to do more damage with their regular attacks and be able to get through the regular fights actually a lot quicker. But since they took all that out, you're basically stuck fighting with the default equipment from the get-go throughout the entire game. Like imagine... this is something that I actually did back in the day when I was young. Imagine playing Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VII, and you just leave the Buster Sword equipped on Cloud through the entire game. You never give him a better sword, you just use the Buster Sword for the entire game. Guess what? The game will actually be a lot harder and a lot more grindier that way. It's not impossible to beat the game that way. It is possible to do. It just takes a lot longer to get through the regular fights. And I remember I did that back in the day. And when I think back to it, that's the way Xenosaga Episode 2 feels. It was supposed to have weapons. Again, I want to backtrack and say that this is a rumor. I don't know whether this was supposed to be the way things were supposed to be, but just, dear God, the combat system is way too grindy in Episode 2. And it really kind of turns me off when trying to even replay the game. There is these suggestions from people out there, and that's probably a valid suggestion too. If you want to replay Episode 2, just use some cheats and get all the skill points and max out your characters. And I've actually done that. I have done cheats just to max the characters out. And guess what? It doesn't really make it that much easier. It's still very grindy, even towards the end. Even with a maxed out character and tons of skill points. It's still very grindy, which, again, leads me back to this rumor that there probably was supposed to be equipment in the first place. But again, I don't know why they did it. Episode 2 was developed a lot quicker than Episode 1, basically just to put a game out. Because, again, the original idea for Xenosaga is that they were going to have a game each year, and an episode each year of the saga. Of course, that didn't really happen, but we make some high promises here, and we can't really keep up with them, so we have to rush a game out. Anyway, I talked a lot about the combat system here. I know it's just there's so much to talk about with that here, but getting back to some more positive things about Episode 2. Again, the narrative of Episode 2 I generally do enjoy much more than Episode 1, because again, there's a lot more development of the characters in Episode 2. The music, Yasunori Mitsuda kind of bowed out from the Xenosaga, and we had a couple of new composers that were introduced at this point. I'm probably still going to mangle their names up, so forgive me, but we have Yuki Kajiura, who does most of the cutscene music in the game. Very good, by the way. I have no problem with Yuki's music. It's extremely good, and I really do enjoy listening to it when you get the chance to listen to it in the game. The other composer was Shinji Hoseya. I apologize. I can't really pronounce these names properly sometimes off the bat here, but it's close enough. But he did most of the actual in-game music, the battle themes and the dungeon music and the walking around second motion music, which I really hate. But um, yeah. His music was more of a mixed bag to me. Most of his music was very generic JRPG music, which I didn't really care for. But like I said, the stuff from Yuki was actually pretty good, so at least there's that part. But yeah. But at least we have music for most of the game now, so we don't have to deal with dead silence anymore. The last thing I'll probably mention about episode 2 was we had the introduction to the ESs, the Einsof mechs. Now, these are the actual mecha we're supposed to have in Xenosaga. They are powered by the Vessels of Anima, and basically they're supposed to be the equivalent to the Omni Gears from Xenogears. So they're basically proper mecha now, not like little short mechas like the eggs were. I do feel like the ESs were a little bit underutilized in episode 2. I kind of wish there was a bit more. There was a bit more to do with the ESs in episode 2, but for what we have there, I guess it works pretty well as an introduction. The ESs don't feel very powerful because we really haven't gotten to the full awakening of the Vessels of Anima yet, part in the story yet. And also there are post-game dungeons in episode 2, which I don't really care for, but whatever. I've taken a look at them before on my own, and they're just kind of there for the challenge. There's really not much else I can say about them, so yeah, I'm just going to move on here. Alright, now to the meat of this discussion here, or my own discussion with myself. Episode 3 of Us Spoke Zarathustra. So this is the big finale of the trilogy. As I mentioned before, I don't really know how this would have originally played out in the original plan of Xenosaga. Episode 3, I really do feel like was just kind of cobbled together as a way to wrap the whole Xenosaga up and to answer the questions and just end things. Kind of like the disc 2 of Xenogears in a way, except we actually get to play the game this time. So, but overall, I do think this is the best game in the trilogy, and it's kind of weird saying that, considering what I just said before, that this is supposed to be the rushed-up wrap-up to the game, to the entire series here. But I actually really did enjoy playing through Episode 3. It definitely is. I think the fun factor of Episode 3 is definitely much more there compared to Episodes 1 and 2. The combat system was simplified. It was much more snappier and quick to me, and I could actually just kind of barrel through the regular mobs pretty quickly. If you watch my playthrough, I eventually got into the habit of just spamming the all tech attacks on enemies, like basically just to weaken all of them, and then just finish off with the special tech attack to wipe them all out in one go with getting all the extra skill points and everything, the finish strikes, basically. So, and honestly, that was fun to me. It actually, I was able to grind in the game way easier than I was in Episode 2 or Episode 1, so for people who do grinding in games, Episode 3 is a lot more bearable. Thankfully, because of that. The other thing I'll probably do want to mention about Episode 3 that I actually found a little bit more refreshing is that that Ether skills were a lot more useful in Episode 3 than they were in Episodes 1 and 2. And in Episode 1, Ether skills had some utility to them, but I don't remember I really used them all that often. Episode 2, Ether skills were kind of next to useless in Episode 2, with the exception of healing. And maybe like using an Ether skill to add a boost to an ally or something like that. Because for the most part, offensive Ether skills just really weren't that useful in either Episode 1 or 2. By the time Episode 3 came out, I think the designers actually balanced things a little bit better, and I actually found myself using the attack Ether skills a little bit more often. Especially if you notice in my playthrough, I started to use attack Ether skills with Momo and Shion, especially a lot more often towards the latter half of the game, because they were actually kind of useful at that point. And they also added to the break bar too, by the way. So yeah, they were able to do some good damage, and it was nice to do something that just wouldn't risk a counterattack from an enemy as well. The other thing is the ES combat was revamped in Episode 3. I think the ES combat in Episode 3 works extremely well. It's not, of course, it's not as complicated as the in-character battle system, but I think what they have there works really well. Finding the right balance between building up your anima gauges so you can release very powerful super attacks, and making sure to guard and heal up your characters. This also leads to another thing too I kind of want to bring up too, about guarding in Episode 3. There's a lot of RPGs out there, at least, especially ones I remember from my youth, like other JRPGs and whatnot. Most of the time in a lot of JRPGs, using the guard command doesn't really amount to much. Like, especially in like old Final Fantasy games, there was always an option to guard, but you kind of never really felt compelled to use it, because it didn't really, like, why would you waste a turn to attack when a guard doesn't really, when the guard acts more like a skip turn option. But here in actually Episode 3, guard actually serves an actual viable purpose to do every now and then, because you will get a heads up that the enemy is going to do a really powerful attack. So what you want to do is make sure everybody's in their guard position, and guard will actually reduce damage. Or in the case of the ESs, it actually will recharge the health of the ESs, because there's really no other way to heal the ES in combat. So you want to make sure you're doing that. So there's an actual purpose to doing guarding in this game, which I love. That I wish more old school JRPGs acted that way, but it kind of took until Episode 3 until a game I actually noticed actually made use of the guard option and actually made it useful, which is a huge plus to me, which is a really nice little surprise to me. Alright, so moving on from combat here. Visual style. They did revamp the visual style once again for Episode 3, but I think by the time they got to Episode 3, they actually found the right mix between anime-like visual style and proportions to versus the more realistic style they had in Episode 2. And they were able to kind of blend the two together in a style that actually works now and actually looks good. And I think Episode 3 probably has the best visual style out of the 3 games here. So big props to improvement there. It's too bad that a lot of this kind of happened too late to save the series, though. I actually have a list of notes I'm kind of reading through here. Oh yeah, we had the return of many of the original voice casts in Episode 1 returned. Voice acting was a lot better than Episode 2. So we got, yeah, I'm pretty sure I said we got the voice cast from Episode 1 back, or I might have misspoke that here, but yeah, a lot of the original voice cast from Episode 1 came back. We got rid of some of the flat voice actors from Episode 2. And it feels like we actually had some voice direction happening now in Episode 3. So a lot of the spoken dialogue actually really works really well in Episode 3. So I'm very happy about that. You'll notice that throughout Episode 3, there's basically like 3 types of cutscenes. The Xenosaga series is pretty heavy on cutscenes. It's just a known thing. You're just going to have to kind of go with it. It's kind of like the Metal Gear Solid Kojima games. They're full of like cutscenes too. I always find it funny that people complain about Xenosaga cutscenes, but like, have you people never played Metal Gear Solid 4, which half of the freaking game is just a movie? I know I'm getting off topic here, but whatever. But yeah, there's like 3 different types of cutscenes throughout this game. You'll notice there's basically what I'd like to call the talking heads cutscene, which is basically just the characters dialoguing with text boxes back and forth at each other with little still portraits. You'll see that used a lot throughout the game. The second level up of a cutscene is the in-engine cutscenes. These are usually voiced and acted out with the animation and everything in-game. These generally look the best to me, especially when you're using a emulator. They look pretty good. And then lastly, we have the pre-rendered full motion videos, which are usually reserved for the most important scenes in the game. Fortunately, since they're FMVs, they don't really scale up with the rest of the game when I'm playing in a higher resolution, so they look kind of like crap sometimes. But I also find it weird that the FMVs are letterboxed in a way that doesn't really fit the rest of the game. Am I the only person who kind of notices that and kind of bugged by that a bit? Like, I'm pretty sure they had them letterboxed that way in the original game too, but I don't know why they did that. But whatever. But yeah, there's still a lot of cutscenes here, and getting back to the general narrative and the story of episode 3. I pretty much enjoyed episode 3's storyline for the most part. I do feel like we kind of had to rush through a lot of things in order to just make sure that a lot of the finer plot points are wrapped up. Most of episode 3 is focused on the story of Xion, mainly. It's only by the time we kind of get to the very end of episode 3 that we start to wrap up things with KOS-MOS, things with Chaos, Ziggy to a bit, to an extent, and Junior, I guess, as well. Really, the only character who doesn't really have much development or involvement is Momo, I noticed. Momo was just kind of there throughout most of episode 3. I kind of wish she had more to do, but she's just kind of there to press buttons and pilot the Ilsa sometimes, and that's kind of it. So, but anyway, most of her story development happened in episode 2 anyway, so I really can't complain. The music was pretty much this time all done by Yuki Kajiura this time, and I consider episode 3's soundtrack to be some of the best JRPG soundtrack music I have ever heard. I mean, there are plenty of times where I just kind of want to stop and listen to the background music in episode 3, and it's so good. It really is. She does such a good job of creating like really dark, moody, atmospheric and atmospheric and ambient tracks throughout the game, and it just kind of fits the mood a lot of times. And the battle themes are not like really overdone. They actually kind of fit the scenes, kind of like a plodding, tactical, gotta think about what I need to do sort of fight sort of situation between the regular combat battles and the ES battles. And then we have actual boss battle music that sometimes is a little bit unique depending on the character you're fighting, but pretty much everything I heard, I pretty much enjoyed. Like, there really wasn't any piece of music in episode 3 that I pretty much disliked hearing. It's like, it's all good. So it's just, yeah, big thumbs up for me on that. So, probably only a couple more things I'll probably talk about in episode 3 here. Let me talk about the Xenogears Easter eggs. There's like a ton of Xenogears Easter eggs littered throughout episode 3. I don't think this was probably originally part of the Xenosaga plan to have all this stuff in here, but obviously we have the Omega Universitas, which is basically the Weltao, and it turns into the Omega Id, which is basically the Weltao Id, so you get to fight that as a bonus battle in the game. I will say that probably is the most tense battle in the entire game, by the way. I was on the edge of my seat in that fight, by the way. I know you can't see me, but that's kind of the way I felt throughout that fight. Jumping back to characters like real quick here. Something that I actually kind of noticed here too about episode 3 is they actually made the professor and Scott as actual characters that are involved in the story now, as opposed to just being side quest characters that you just kind of deal with at your leisure, as they were back in episode 2 and 1. So there's an actual story there. What there is sort of the backstory involvement with the dark professor, which was really part of the post game content in episode 2, which I feel like should not have been post game content, but whatever. That's the direction they decided to go with. But thankfully, the professor actually is more of a character this time, and actually involved, and it's actually him who rebuilds KOS-MOS into her ultimate version 4 form. So KOS-MOS is actually powered by super robot parts in her version 4 form, which I just find that incredible to think about. Just like KOS-MOS, the high-tech battle android made to kill Xenosis, is not strong enough, so let's put a bunch of super robot parts into her now and just make her even like uber powerful now. I just love that. It's just incredible to think about. Also, I don't know if this was a point that kind of went by like pretty quick in the storyline, but they actually put one of the early Kaiser generators inside the Asher, the ES Asher, because its vessel of animals is missing during that whole time travel part on Old Miltia, so they actually had to power it up with a different power source. So they used a super robot engine and put it into it, and oh yeah, the ES Asher works fine. I don't feel like I want to point this out too much here, but I'm like, if we have like super robots in this world with that have enough power to power an ES, as well as an anti-Gnosis weapon system, I can't help but wonder, is like, why are there not more super robots in the Galaxy Federation? Just like, because these things are so powerful, why are they not like more recognized and said, no, I'm gonna build the Omega system, but wait, I'm gonna become the most powerful URTV ever. I'm gonna be the Patriarch, and I'm gonna absorb the power of the Zohar. They immediately get smacked down by early Kaiser. It's just silly to think about. It really is. So I'm not gonna pay too much attention to it, but whatever. I was talking about Xenogears Easter eggs too. Yeah, I kind of really got off track there, but yeah, we have the Weltao thing, and obviously the Merkaba is there. The Mega System is obviously a stand-in for Deus, and it ends up turning into something that resembles the Xenogears at first, and then it becomes something that resembles the final form of Deus from Xenogears. All of these are little interesting little tidbits here, as well as the little tiny Weltao and Vierge figures that are kind of hanging off the ends of the Omega Matum Psychosis. And also there was back on Old Miltia we had Mai Magus, who obviously was a stand-in for the girl I keep forgetting the name of, Maria Balthazar? Is that her name? I think that's her name. Yeah, we had a stand-in for her, and actually I noticed something when I kind of looked at that scene again. They live in this little hut. Mai and Eisen Magus, they kind of live in this little hut near a mine. I did not notice this at first, but the roof of their little hut is basically the Shivat city thing that's kind of this on top of their house, with the little giant donut with the little four circles on top of it. It's basically the Shivat Shivat city from Xenogears. I don't know why I didn't notice that at first, but when I went back through that scene, I noticed that and I was like, oh wait, that looks familiar. That's what that is. So. I'm sure there's probably a few other references throughout the game, but I can't remember off the top of my head right now. But those are the ones that kind of come to mind right away. Oh yeah, and the obvious ones, Nephilim and Abel, obviously. I guess I'll probably talk about them a little bit here, or I should probably wait till the end here. I know I'm gonna wait till the end here because there's actually something about Abel and Ellie, but Abel and Nephilim I kind of want to bring up. After I'm finished talking about episode 3 here. But let me finish up episode 3 here. There's like one really big important thing I want to talk about episode 3, and it may tie in, I may be able to tie all of this together here. And it's about KOS-MOS at the end of the game. So at the end of the game, what we find out with KOS-MOS is that KOS-MOS was originally as a prototype to serve, I guess she was supposed to be a prototype. Talos is supposed to be the actual final version of what this whole thing that Kevin is doing to basically resurrect Mary Magdalene. I still find it weird that Talos is Mary's actual body, which guys would make her a cyborg. Like, how long was Mary's body sitting in Renslaw Chateau? I'm still trying to wrap my head around that, but whatever. KOS-MOS is entirely an android, by the way. She's entirely machine. She's not human or anything like that. But apparently, Mary's spirit is inside KOS-MOS. The body of Mary is in Talos. I'm not quite sure how the spirit of Mary ended up in KOS-MOS. I don't remember if that's ever been established in the story. It probably is. I may just be forgetting here, but... And that explains why KOS-MOS turns into her blue-eyed mode every now and then, because that's actually Mary taking over. This was first seen way back in episode 1. So we have this conflict between KOS-MOS and Talos. KOS-MOS wins, and something happens with Talos. She disintegrates and merges with KOS-MOS at that point, and then Mary's spirit is now unified, and she can now completely take over KOS-MOS at that point. So at that point in the game, KOS-MOS is basically Mary at that point. And then we get towards the end where we have to confront Wilhelm and everything. Wilhelm, I guess, has some sort of influence or something over Mary and compels her to bring Xion and the startup key for the Zarathustra system to him. And at that moment, there's something very interesting happens at that moment. I know you're thinking of the obvious here. Mary basically represses herself and lets KOS-MOS take over again. That's kind of the obvious part. And then KOS-MOS destroys the key. And thus, thwarting Wilhelm's master plan and everything. It's a very epic moment, by the way. But here's something like, I don't really know if too many people actually notice what happens after that point with KOS-MOS. And I actually pointed this out during the ending cutscene, where KOS-MOS is trying to protect Chaos and Nephilim and Abel from the Gnosis. At the very end, KOS-MOS actually yells. I actually pointed that out on stream. And the reason that's important to me is because, well, for one thing, KOS-MOS has never yelled before. Throughout the entire trilogy, she's never done that before. And thinking like a few steps back, at the moment when Mary subdued herself, and also remember, Mary's spirit actually went out of KOS-MOS and merged with Nephilim too as well, by the way. KOS-MOS at that point, I don't know whether this is... I think this kind of fits into what the original idea for Xenosaga was, at least what the original ending for the first story arc was supposed to be. Because remember, KOS-MOS up until this point has pretty much just been a machine at this point, with basically a soul just kind of temporarily existing in her. That soul leaves, but KOS-MOS is changed at that point. And there's really not enough time at the end of the game to really digest this and really figure out what's going on, because everything's happening so fast at the end here. But I definitely noticed that KOS-MOS' behavior had changed at that point. She was no longer just a machine at that point. She had become alive at that point. And again, I go back to Mary's spirit was no longer inside of her anymore. So Mary was not controlling her anymore at that point. KOS-MOS had evolved into something different at that point. She had emotion. She acted like an actual person now. Totally different. That's such a huge evolvement and change for a character at the very, very end of the story, unfortunately. But apparently this does tie in, I think, to what the original plan was. And I had this note kind of written down here. KOS-MOS' change happens at the end of what was supposed to be the first arc of Xenosaga. She was now supposed to be the new precursor to a new mother character that would emerge at the beginning of the next arc of the storyline, which would take place on Lost Jerusalem. And this is where the Xenogears plot would actually begin. I want you to take a little time travel trip all the way back to the beginning of Xenogears. Go all the way back. Way back. How did Xenogears begin? I'm not talking about the Eldritch crashing and everything. I'm talking about the being, the original mother that was created at the beginning of Xenogears. The original Ellie character that was created. Or, actually more accurately, the original Miang character that was created. I do think KOS-MOS was supposed to be that character now. A sort of a combination of machine and human who's supposed to be the new mother figure for the new reawakening of the new reincarnated souls on Lost Jerusalem. I do believe that's how the original second arc of Xenosaga was supposed to begin. Like that. Because KOS-MOS was supposed to be a constant throughout the entire 6-episode plan that was originally envisioned. She was supposed to be around throughout the entire thing. But now when I kind of look at and see what happened at the end of episode 3, it's like, oh, okay. So now KOS-MOS actually has an actual role in the story as opposed to just being the vessel for carrying Mary's soul around. So I just thought that was incredibly fascinating. And it really does disappoint me that we aren't going to know what happens after that point, because now I'm like, KOS-MOS is an actual character now. I kind of want to see what happens next. But that's not going to happen, so. And now KOS-MOS is just kind of relegated to being a cameo in other video games from now on, so. I don't think I can even count how many times KOS-MOS has cameoed in other video games. You could make her in Soul Calibur 3, I think. You could get the parts to make her in Soul Calibur 3. She was in Namco X Capcom games. She was in the Super Robot Wars spin-off games, Endless Frontier. What else was she in? Obviously, she's in Xenoblade Chronicles 2. I'm sure there's a couple other games she cameoed in. It seems like Namco Bandai likes to kind of bring her out every now and then as a cameo character. And just kind of forget about the original Xenosaga entirely. It's kind of the way things are right now. Unfortunately, so. But yeah, that's episode 3. I really do enjoy episode 3. It definitely is the best of the trilogy. Even though I can probably come back and say that Xenosaga 3 probably strays the most from what the original plan for Xenosaga was, but maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing, but yeah. Yeah, that's what I have to say about episode 3, so let me move on to a few other topics regarding the series as a whole here. Okay, so the Xenosaga series is not just the three episode games that we got. It was really designed to be not just be 6 episodes. It was really designed to be a franchise as well. So we got a bunch of spin-off media and stuff. So I'm just gonna kind of cover this stuff kind of quick here. First thing I'll try to talk about really briefly is the Xenosaga Freaks. That is freaks, like an actual freak. This was basically just a side game full of mini games, and it was supposed to kind of be not really a companion piece to episode 1. It was just kind of like a little collection of mini game stuff related to episode 1. There was some additional story information on it, but nothing really essential or important. So I've never really played it or anything. I've watched a few videos of it, and it's just there's really not a whole lot to it, so I really would not consider it to be essential for any Xeno fan to really look that deeply into, so, but whatever. See, the next thing, let's talk about the anime adaptation. Alright, I'm just gonna say here, I've never really sat down and watched the entirety of the anime adaptation. I've only seen like a few episodes of it, and that was a long time ago. And even from that, from what I can from what I recall, it was pretty bad. So I don't even know why they made that to begin with, but okay, whatever. They made it. It's a thing. Whatever. It's basically an animated version and condensed version of the events of episode one, from what I understand. Of course, with any adaptation, a lot of the nuances and context is going to be left out just to kind of keep things condensed within the. I think it's only a 12 or I think it's a short episode series. It's not like a full 26 episodes. It's like a short series. It's like 12 episodes or something like that. Um, but even so, it's like really ultra condensed. And I've seen the animation quality of it. It's just kind of like it, it makes episode two look good. Let me just put it that way. Um, the only really notable thing I'll say about the anime adaptation is that they do try to make a character out of one of the curse washers, who are the little uh, precursors to the Type 100 series realities we see throughout the trilogy. Albedo, for some reason, has this thing about the curse washers because they saved him from dying alone on Old Miltia a long time ago, so he's got this complexer thing about them. So that's why you see the curse washers around him all the time. But but apparently, one of the curse washers were turned into a character who was kind of like smuggled onto the Woglinde and pretending to be a Type 100 series on there to kind of spy for Albedo and find what's going on. And there's some plot involvement about her towards the end of the series. I don't really know too much of the details about it, but that's really the only thing I'm aware of that's really different from what was in episode one. So I guess if you want to know about this Curse Washer character, you can maybe watch the anime or just read up a summary of it. I don't think I would recommend anybody watch the anime. It's kind of bad, so whatever. Moving on. Pied Piper. I talked about Pied Piper and as the missing year as well, kind of in my prelude video to episode three. I'll just kind of cover them kind of briefly here. Pied Piper is the backstory of Ziggy, basically. Yan Sauer, as he's called, is his actual real name. This gives you some of the backstory of him as well as the backstory for Voyager as well. This is probably one of my personal disappointments with the Xenosaga series because Ziggy was probably one of my most liked characters throughout the trilogy, and the fact that his backstory was kind of relegated to this mobile side game. By the way, this is not an Android or iOS side game. This was released on a mobile phone platform called the Vodafone. And if you don't know what a Vodafone is, welcome to the club. I don't know what a Vodafone is either, because apparently it died out pretty quick after it was released. So, congratulations, Monolith Soft, for releasing a good piece of background lore on a gaming system that was kind of dead by the time it arrived. So, good job. Um, but anyway, I from what I understand, the Pied Piper storyline, and I read this in some of the background materials, this was supposed to be experienced originally as a encephalon dive in one of the probably in the what the original episode two was going to be. So you would have actually gone back and actually experienced the events of Vince and Jan Sauer's memories. Very similar to what happened with the encephalon dives into Momo, as well as the one into KOS-MOS. So it probably would have played out like that. And I'm actually and reading that, I'm actually really disappointed that did not make it into episode three of what we have. So it probably would have been too much material, but it's like, man, I really wish I could have played Pied Piper the way it was supposed to be played out because, again, it's an interesting storyline. And I like Ziggy as a character, so why did I have to miss out on this? So, yeah. That's Pied Piper. The Missing Year. Missing Year is basically just sort of like a short visual novel sort of thing. It was online only at a particular website. I don't remember the exact details. Um, Again, I kind of feel like the Missing Year content. Well, Missing Year basically covers what happened between episode 2 and episode 3, basically, and sets up the events of episode 3. You have this whole thing about the Gnosis terrorism. This other realian called Almadale gets involved, and you find out about Grimoire Verum, and you get the backstory behind Nephilim in A Missing Year. And throughout that, you find out, or Shion finds out, her father was involved with Utic and Vector and some of this other shady business, and that leads her to leaving Vector. That's why she starts out episode 3 kind of on her own. You also get introduced to Doctus and Scientia as well throughout that in A Missing Year. So again, I kind of wish we could have actually played through A Missing Year as a proper game. Like maybe they could have combined Pied Piper and A Missing Year into like one game, and we could have maybe played through that. Like have Shion, Jin, and whoever dealing with the Missing Year side of events, and maybe had the rest of the characters like Junior, Ziggy, Momo, and Chaos dealing with the Pied Piper side of events. And we could have actually had enough that we could have had enough for like a full game there, at least in my opinion. So it's just kind of a shame we get to miss all of that, because Microsoft released both of these things on platforms that have long since died out. So, but you can watch these on YouTube if you want to just go through them, or you can just read up on them, I guess. So, I watched the summaries of Missing Year and Pied Piper on YouTube, so that's how I kind of got most of my information on those. Last thing I'll probably just mention here real quick is the Xenosaga 1 and 2 DS remake. Kind of getting back to episode 1 and what I said about episode 1, how episode 1 was basically like the purest form of what the original plan was. The 1 and 2 DS remake is supposed to be a kind of continuation of that idea, and is supposed to be closer to what the original plan was for what the original episode 1 was. So this was on the Nintendo DS. It's very, very, very text heavy, and last I checked, there's no translation patch for this game. Of course, you can find means to find the game and play it, but you're not going to be able to understand anything, so good luck with that. I know there are text translations that have been done by some very helpful people, but I just can't really play a game and look at a text file and read it, and play the game and look at a text file and play the game. I can't do that for a big text-heavy JRPG. It just kind of drags the whole thing out, so whatever. I really wish this would have gotten a proper translation, because I'm really curious about what changes are in this game. I know there's a bit more involvement in the episode 2 part of this game. Is probably done a little bit better than what the actual episode 2 game that we got, so sadly I don't know if we're ever really going to know for certain, or at least those of us in the West who can't read Japanese. From Japanese fans, of course, will have access to this game and be able to enjoy it to their fullest extent, as long as they can find a copy of it. So yeah, anyway, that's probably about all we have to say about the spin-off stuff here, so move on to the end here. Alright here, so I'm kind of at the end of my discussion video here. I'm probably going to get this to about like an hour here if possible. So final notes here. I did play through this trilogy on emulation, and for those wondering, I do actually own copies of the game, so don't get into like a hissy fit here. Playing this game in emulation allowed me to play these games in 16:9 resolution, upscaled with high definition resolutions and everything, and a few little graphical enhancements here and there. The emulation we have right now really isn't perfect for any of the 3 games. I kind of got it as close as I could. So episode 3 probably has the most problems, especially when it comes to certain post-processing effects on cutscenes. I know there's several cutscenes in the game where the cutscenes go dark or just black background behind the characters, or there would be a weird filter effect on top of the characters, or the Zarathustra dungeon just looks really psychedelic and weird. That's all because of the emulator, and unfortunately that's just a problem that I can't really fix. It's just kind of up to the people who make the emulators to kind of figure out how to fix these problems at some point, because there's only so much I can do with that. So, but for the most part, I think episode 1 and episode 2 I was able to run pretty well. The only reason I kind of talk so much about this emulation side of this thing here is because this kind of gives me an idea of what a HD remake of Xenosaga would probably look like. And I gotta say, just upscaling these games and having them in modern resolution and everything, I think they hold up pretty well for the most part. I think they look pretty good when upscaled. So, and keep in mind, these are PlayStation 2 games. And in episode 1, the character models had a lot of polygons and detail in them. And upscaling all of that with proper sharpening and everything, they look really good. It's a downside if they do kind of slow the game down a little bit, especially when you have like 3 eggs in battle at once. But by the time they got to episode 2, they kind of oversimplified the models a little bit, and it didn't really upscale quite as well. Definitely the textures took a big hit when they were upscaled in episode 2. Episode 3 found a better balance, and I think episode 3 still looks really good when upscaled. So, but yeah, I'm just saying this because this is kind of what I would expect to see an HD remake of Xenosaga to look like. The only thing you could probably do at this point to improve it would be to actually replace the textures and make a better high resolution textures in the game. You wouldn't really have to change the geometry of the models too much. Just give some better textures. But that would be something that Namco Bandai would have to do, or Monolith Soft would have to do, so this is as good as things are going to get, basically, so. But still, it was pretty nice to kind of re-experience this game in HD as best as I could manage. So, overall, this is still an incredible science fiction RPG series. I still think it's one of the best science fiction RPGs out there. I know there's probably a few others. And speaking of like big RPG science fiction games, I mean, when most people talk about not JRPG, but RPG science fiction games in particular, probably a lot of times the first thing that comes to mind is probably the Mass Effect trilogy. That's probably the biggest thing when it comes to science fiction RPGs. I wouldn't really compare Xenosaga to Mass Effect too much, but sometimes I kind of feel like there may be a little bit of similarity in terms of the world building and the scale and scope involved in the between the two different series here. But obviously, the Xenosaga was supposed to be a lot more than what we got, but I think what we got here is still pretty good. So again, kind of like going back to Xenogears again here. At least we got what we got. So even back with Xenogears, we only got episode 5, but at least we got to get most of the full story of episode 5. Even if this too was kind of squashed together in a very narrative heavily form, at least we got the whole story and it concluded. So we don't have any dangling threads at the end to deal with. Xenosaga, I felt, suffered a very similar fate. It got to be too big for what it was supposed to be, and it got to get squashed down at the ends. So, but again, I feel like we still got a complete story for the most part here. The only really dangling threads I would say is probably Lost Jerusalem. They do a setup at the end of episode 3, basically, that infers that Shion, Jr., Alan, and the Elsa crew are gonna go find Lost Jerusalem. And they imply that Momo and Julie and the people left on Durand are going to try to rebuild the UMN network somehow. I don't know how they're going to do that, but whatever. And there would be a continuing story in the Xenosaga series. Which brings me to one of the last points I want to bring up. This is in some of the materials for Xenosaga. A interview was made to Takahashi, at one point about Xenosaga, and this is post episode 3 and everything, probably around the time. I don't remember exactly when this question was asked, but it was probably around the time when Xenoblade Chronicles was coming out. But he was asked basically if there was ever a possibility of going back to Xenosaga at some point and trying to continue it. And basically, Takahashi's answer was that he is open to returning to Xenosaga at some point. The only thing that he's kind of waiting on is if Namco Bandai wants to continue, or if maybe Nintendo wants to maybe pick up the slack and try and continue it. But for right now, Xenosaga is pretty much done. So we're probably not going to see anything more from Xenosaga. So it kind of sucks, but I do find it interesting that Takahashi is open to the idea of continuing Xenosaga at some point. It's just very, very unlikely to happen. So, and also when it comes to what the idea of the HD remake, which I kind of talked about a little bit here. For those who don't know or in the know about this, HD remake of the Xenosaga trilogy was considered at one point by Namco Bandai, but they ultimately decided not to go through with it because it wasn't financially feasible. Basically, they didn't think there'd be enough profit for them to actually do a remaster of the trilogy to put on modern consoles and everything. So again, that's kind of disappointing because, as I kind of just showed when I played the game recently, this game looks good when it's in HD, and I think it would probably still look great and probably would still sell, but especially since, we have this new generation of Xeno fans with the Xenoblade Chronicles games now, so, and believe me, there's several Xenoblade Chronicles fans who want to look back at the origins of the Xeno series, and where are they going to look? They're going to look at Xenosaga and Xenogears. They're going to want to play those games. So, just, it kind of almost feels like a no-brainer to me from Namco's point of view, just to kind of cash in on the popularity of the Xenoblade Chronicles games, but I guess they don't really want to do that. It's just easier to have KOS-MOS cameo in games, I guess, or whatever. Alright, so I guess that's kind of it for the Xenosaga from me, so Xenogears kind of had such a big impact on me in my youth, and I was like so excited to see the Xeno series continue when Xenosaga was first announced, and it's like that was an immediate pre-order for me at the time when this series came out, and episode 2 and 3 were also pre-orders for me from well. I remember I got those from GameStop at the time, so along with some of the pre-order bonuses, which was episode 2 had the movie disc for episode 1 in case you want to watch all the movies again. I had that DVD, and I believe as you pre-ordered Xenosaga 3, you got the lenticular cover version, which is the one I have. So awesome. So, but yeah, I'm gonna end this on one note. One idea to end this on. And I want to pose a question too. To anybody who actually made it to the end of this video, I want you to think about something here. What if Xenosaga did not fail? What would have happened? What if we got that 6-episode epic science fiction JRPG? What if we had gotten that? Do you think Xenoblade Chronicles would have still happened? I really don't know. Because if it did happen, then obviously it would have been a success for Namco Bandai, and probably Monolith Soft would not have ended up being bought by Nintendo, and we might not have gotten Xenoblade Chronicles, or at least not what we know as Xenoblade Chronicles. I do go back and I mentioned this when I actually played Xenoblade Chronicles. Xenoblade Chronicles was supposed to be a game called Monado, the beginning of the world. That's what the original game was supposed to be. It wasn't supposed to be a Xeno game. In fact, it was, and I have to say this too, it's kind of weird. But Xenosaga had to fail in order for Xenoblade Chronicles to become a thing. It was because of the failure of Xenosaga that we got Xenoblade Chronicles. Because it was during episode 3, apparently morale was very low in Monolith Soft because of the failure of Xenosaga, and it was at this time that Takahashi started brainstorming the idea for a new game that he wanted to be basically completely different from Xenosaga and as far away from that as he probably could get. And that's when he came up with the idea of the two giant titans fighting each other. That happened during episode 3 of Xenosaga, when the game was being made. And eventually that idea translated and evolved into what we know as Xenoblade Chronicles later on, so I do find it interesting to think about here. If Xenosaga had succeeded, would that game have still been made? I can only think there probably would have been like two options that would have occurred. Either one, the Xenoblade Chronicles would not have been a thing if this would not have happened. Or two, they probably would have took that idea of the Titans and it would have still been made, but it just wouldn't have been labeled a Xeno game. It probably still would have been called Monado, Beginning of the World. And from there, who knows what would have happened at that point. So I just find it interesting to think about. So, and I'm kind of curious, and that is the question I'm posing. Do you think Xenoblade Chronicles would have still happened if Xenosaga had not failed? Because the idea that epic 6-part RPG science fiction game had to fail in order for us to get another series of games. So anyway, I'm gonna leave it on that note. If you watched it all the way to the end, thank you very much. And right now I actually am, at the time of making this video, I have begun playing through Xenoblade Chronicles 2, so if you're interested in my thoughts on that or want to see the gameplay of that, you can watch those videos. They'll be on my YouTube channel here, or there's also my Twitch channel if you want to catch me live there. If you want to see me actually playing the game in real time and reacting to things in real time. So anyway, that's it for the Xenosaga. Maybe in another few years I'll revisit it again someday. Maybe we'll get an actual remake. Although I still think the odds are pretty low with that, but whatever. Anyway, signing off, and the saga will continue into the Chronicles. Take care. Bye-bye.